and Wale Lawal. Before we begin, I'd like to say it's such a huge honor to be here, to be able to speak to these great minds who have not only inspired me, but have influenced the way I think about creating spaces for other younger emerging writers in the Nigerian literary industry. Thank you so much. Please give them a round of applause. They've done so much for literature. I've heard so much about the arcade passion, the audience, uproar. I don't think this is a very arcade round of applause. Please give them a arcade round of applause. Yeah, this is more like it. That's more like it. Let's get right into it. Before we discuss the challenges of documenting new voices in Nigerian literature, African literature, I want you all to briefly speak about the work you do at your magazine. I would like to start with you, Anayi. I know British Paper has been going on for over a decade now, 14 years. Yeah, so I'd like to speak about the journey of Nigerian literature and how you've grew alongside it, and what you think is the current state of Nigerian literature as it is.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's so good to be here. So wonderful. It's been amazing listening to all these panels and meeting old friends, sharing in just really feeling conversations. Thank you, Lola. And thank you so much. It's nice to be here with all of you. The question is,
tell us the work, introduce your work. You've been doing work at British Paper for over a decade. Please tell us about your journey with British Paper and where it currently stands with Nigerian literature, African literature at present.
British Paper is some people ask me, is it a magazine? Is it a journal? It's hard to say, because there's a way that digital culture completely disrupted the space of publications. So Brittle Paper is very content-based in a way that maybe a magazine might feel, but it's also a news content site. So I feel like we're one of the first people who realized that literature has news. That news as a type of content applies to literature. That people are doing things are happening, and they need to be reported, almost like journalism, right? And then, but Brittle Paper beyond that is also a space where we have a learning platform, right? We teach courses where people can go on and take online classes. There are many people who tell me, I just published my book and I took your fiction writing courses. So it's a learning platform, right? It is also a site where we manage this big database of books, all these books that you guys are publishing. As it comes out, we record them, we put them in our database, and it helps us to kind of understand the culture, right? So that it's so many different things. It's what I would think of just as a platform. When people say, what is it? I think it's just an online digital literary platform. But Brittle Paper started from a personal place of love when I was at Duke University doing my PhD. And I just got sick, just got exhausted from the courses I was taking, and I felt like I just needed a blog. You know the days of blog, it sounds like, there used to be a time. So, but then in 2012, I realized that there was something shifting in the African literary space, that it was moving and booming in ways that I had never noticed before. There was Adichie, there was Chris Abani, there was, Binyavanga in the early 2000s. By 2012, it just felt like you could feel the energy. And I was just like, why isn't there a space where If you want to know about African literature, if you want to experience African book culture, African books, where can you go? That could just be a start. And I pivoted. So it went from a personal blog to a space that was designed to kind of curate African literary culture. And I think that that's what we do. We tell the story of the culture. Because cultures, you need to tell a story of a culture. If you don't, the culture doesn't happen, right? And for us, that is what we do. All of you, you are doing all the things you're doing. You're publishing amazing books. You're having crazy journeys where people go from here and they become here, right? You have struggles. Lola and the work that she does, all of that is happening. Someone has to be able to look and say, okay, how can I tell this story so that we can know that we are in something, that we are experiencing a culture, and that it is happening. That aspect of documenting, for me, I think, is what we do, to document the culture.
Thank you, Anae. Thank you so much. Wale, please tell us about the Republic. The Republic is one magazine I really love. I super love the Republic, and I think the work you're doing is important. So just tell us about your journey with the Republic, how it came to be where it is now.
Yeah, it's a very long story, but I'll try and focus on the highlights, right? I started thinking about the Republic as early as 2014. I was a student there. I was studying at LSE. I was studying economic history. My background is all in economics. But I'd always, been interested in reading, big fan of literature, even like to a very, very obsessive level. But I think as a student at the time, there was so much happening on the continent. And I'll use economics as an example. In the economic side of things, Nigeria was rebasing its economy, Ghana, Kenya, they were all doing that. There was so much happening. There was so much, prosperity. There was this whole idea of Africa rising. We had just come from that era of the hopeless continent, and there was now The Economist cover. Actually, two Economist covers, one from the 90s or early 2000s that said Africa, the hopeless continent, and then the other by 2010 that said Africa rising, and everyone took on that paradigm. But I knew that it was a very strange thing because, I was living in Lagos as well, even though I was studying abroad, and I knew that as much as Nigeria could claim that our GDP had gone from 200 and something million to over 500 million overnight, I was speaking to people who were like, but I don't feel this economic growth. The reality of it was that when we have these narratives, the reality on the ground tends to be very, very different, especially at that time where a lot of the narratives that we were getting were more foreign-dominated narratives. And so I found it very difficult to understand what was happening on the continent or to reconcile what was happening on the continent with the narratives that I was seeing in the most, I'd say, credible or most trustworthy media. And so that kind of just signaled to me that there was a gap, particularly from a student perspective. And initially, my idea was to just create a website where we could feature African experts, academics, who maybe once every 2 weeks would contribute to a very, very pressing issue, because I felt that there was something missing. At that time, my major sources were academic texts, but all of us who deal with academic texts know how long it takes to produce academic work. So if a protest happens today, you're reading about it in 6 months. How is that really useful? And then, it is useful, let me correct that, but for a student at that time, I thought, how is that really useful when I need to write that essay tomorrow? And then, of course, we had local press, which I think is underrated in many ways because local press has a lot of depth. There are areas that local press can go to that, honestly, we've not seen any other alternative being able to go to. But the issue with local press was, financial sustainability, credibility. It didn't always have the best journalistic practices, and so it wasn't really credible. It wasn't really something that you could always cite without double-checking many times. And of course, you had foreign press. You had The Economist. I've been reading The Economist since I was 14. And Le Monde, Der Spiegel, all of these countries had their own regional publications that spoke to the world. And what I increasingly found was that their coverage was very trustworthy, very credible, but it wasn't coverage of what was happening. It was coverage of what their audiences were interested in about what was happening. And those are two very different things. They were very loyal to foreign audiences. They didn't care about Nigeria to the extent that there are areas of things that happen in Nigeria that so long as their audiences are not interested, they're not covering it. And I remember back in the day, you would read The Economist and they would have just maybe one short paragraph on Nigeria, and then the next issue would be Congo. So you couldn't even have that kind of consistent, in-depth coverage in that way. Because again, that's not what their audiences were interested in. And we still live in a system that relies a lot on foreign press, but it's always very important to emphasize that foreign press is always loyal to their immediate audience, and that's not us. And I think it's very important to recognize that. And then, of course, we had that explosion of social media in the 2010s. Blogs, I think, there was so much happening there. The naked convos, brittle paper, took off in that, in that era. And I think that there was something about the energy, the vibrancy, just this idea that there were new voices, alternative voices, and these were local voices that would sneak in pigeon into coverage, that would just do things that we weren't really, really seeing, and that were making the stories more engaging. And what that told me was that, okay, there's a gap here to build something that has the rigor of academia, it has the reach of local press, as in the depth and local relevancy of local press. It has or can aspire to have the credibility of foreign press, but it will also have the engagement, that vibrancy of the blogs and the social media, and the social media-led publications that we saw, at those times. Of course, there's a lot that happened in that kind of blog era, but I think we can all also acknowledge that blogging is something that fundamentally is restrained to urban areas, areas where people have access to the internet, areas where people are kind of, can follow people on social media, can follow those unique voices. And so for me, it also meant that, look, we live in a print-dominated, culture still, and as much as print is declining, there is still an opportunity to really capture audiences and stand out by producing in print. I think at the time, what I was thinking about was, look, there's Tech Cabal, there's Nairametrics, there's everybody that's publishing online. How are you going to stand out if you're going to publish something? Are you just going to create another website? Or are you going to be those people crazy enough to really put a lot of design work and a lot of work into print so that when people look at it, they're like, okay, what is going on here? And so we decided to launch in print, we decided to launch online as well. And I think it's very important that we also establish that print for us has always been that vehicle to introduce ourselves to people. For us, we understand that print is something that is declining and will decline over the years, but we still see that there is a big, big audience for print here. And for me, the way I look at it is, our goal is you put the magazine somewhere, and people walk into that space, they're picking it up, and for those minutes, you have their attention. There is no WhatsApp message that's coming in. There is no other brand that's in there. It is immersive. And so print really allowed us to really sell our identity, to really stand out in that way. And who we are as a publication, I think it's very important that through the years, started as an idea in 2014. By 2018, we had registered as a company. By 2021, we had also registered a US-based arm because we were starting to think really, really critically about fundraising. But who we are and what has always connected us through that process is a publication that really is, held together by two things. The first being that we are progressive. At that time, and I think it's also in the spirit of that period, we were seeing a lot of, women-led movements. We were seeing Bring Back Our Girls. We were seeing people start to talk about progressiveness in Nigeria in a way that, at least from my own experience, I hadn't really seen. It was a time when, Nigeria signed, this is around 20, around, it was within that era that Nigeria signed the anti-homosexuality bill, for example. So people were really talking about issues, and we felt that, look, you cannot start something that wants to speak to Nigerians and wants to be a national publication without speaking to the issues that they care about. And so we said we were going to be progressive, and then we also said we were going to be independent. Now, these two things are very important because independence for us works in the sense that we will publish stuff that we don't agree with. We want to avoid echo chambers. So long as it has met certain journalistic editorial standards, we will publish it. And so long as it enables us to move the conversation forward. So our own definition of progressiveness isn't just this idea that, being progressive is one thing, it's a continuous thing. I remember there was a post I saw from Marlon James that he was very, very angry at something. And he said, the goal of being progressive is to progress, so, and that's always the way that we've thought about it. It's to provoke, it's to inspire, it's to challenge readers, as well as also just bring people together. And so how we define ourselves right now is as a publication that offers an essential guide to the ideas, the trends, the stories, the people shaping Nigeria and the broader African continent. And of course, we all know The Republic as a magazine, but it's also a product that's housed within a larger, startup, also called The Republic. And as a startup, we identify as a digital media startup that focuses on producing compelling African journalism, as well as digital tools that support the production of compelling African journalism. So we also have, alongside The Republic, an image licensing platform that we've, just finished building the MVP for. And so all of this for us is to see a world in which we can tell really original, compelling stories that reach global best standards from here. And that's the work that we've been doing and that, we're continuing to do.
Thank you so much, Wale. You've answered my next two questions. You've answered my next two questions. So I'll just ask the first question to Taufik. Then the next two questions, I'll ask them. He already answered it. So yeah. So Taufik, you are the editor-in-chief of Olumo Review. And yeah, it's a new publication, but it's also a very important publication. I know because I've been published in Olumo Review. I have a poem in Olumo Review. It's a very brilliant publication. So can you please tell us about how Olumo Review came into being and the work you do at Olumo Review?
Okay, hello everyone. It's nice to be on this platform. Thanks so much. And I think I'm the voice of poets in the house. So we'll be talking about poetry specifically. What we do at Olumo Review, Flory Joshua is the founding editor, and I am editor-in-chief. What we do is just an answer to a clarion call that, we need to appreciate the job of brittle paper. When I started writing poetry back then, 2014, 2015, if your works are not published in brittle paper, parousia, then you are not in the landscape there. So we can count the number of works, journals that we have back then. So they are not really much. So, and poets, young poets are looking for place. There is a competition already. They might be receiving up to hundreds of works and all that. So we need more journals that can, feature our works. So, and like as an answer to how the literary landscape have grown over the years, then we started having various journals, started having Agbo, started having Atelewo, started having a number of them. Now, if we start counting them, we will lose count. So we now have platforms for our works, and Olumo Review is also an addition to these platforms for younger poets, for contemporary writers, particularly poets, because what we publish is strictly poetry, and we don't publish too much. The maximum we have published in an issue is just 8 poets. So we want the audience looking for Nigerian poets who want to read Nigerian poets to know that when I go to Olumo Review, we will see their works there. So these are, what we have answered to by, launching Olumo Review. Yeah.
Thank you, Taufik. Which leads me to my next question. My next question is, what are your considerations when you edit your magazine? Wale Lawal has answered in this question, or what you consider when you edit the magazine. So as a whole, when you think of a magazine as a body of work, as an editor-in-chief, as editor, how do you think of the works you accept? Do you accept in terms of quality only? Are you trying to shape a sort of conversation? So, yeah, this question.
I think we are concerned about quality and then the themes that is being addressed. And, as a poet myself and as an editor, when we are reading works, we put ourselves in the shoes of readers. That does this work teach me new things? Am I learning new things, or does it look like a recycle of other works that I've read before? So these are things that we are very strict about. And you know, poetry seems like a work that has a number of rules but we are more concerned about, I've learned some things in my own, personally. I look for three things. I will look at, does it have velocity of language? Language is very important. And I will look at, emotional ethos. Is this something that readers can actually relate to? And then I will ask myself that, is this poem a fish tank of metaphors? Do you get it? So it is very, very important. And about learning new things, during the times of our pioneers, Professor Wole Soyinka, Chino Achebe, Niyo Shudari, a number of them, they have their stories. And these are, during my time in secondary school, by the time I joined secondary school, history has been prescribed as a subject. So it is this literature that introduced us to this history. We were able to meet our stories, that things that happened, colonialism, post-colonialism struggles, and all these things. So we want works that also tell the stories of the contemporary times. We also have our stories. We have Bring Back Our Girls. We have the insurgents. We have End SARS, Lekki Massacre. We want poems that tell these stories, tell people that come to it, to learn new things from this work. So these are very, very important for us, and these are what we look out for when we are editing works for our journal. Yep.
Thank you so much, Taufik. I know you mentioned that British paper is not actually is difficult to categorize. Yeah, but I also know you publish poetry, you publish fiction on British paper. So in addition to the other news publications or press releases or whatever, how do you, what are the considerations in these contents that are published on British paper? What do you consider? The quality? Are you trying to shape a conversation? Are you trying to just promote? So yeah, I would like to know.
We have a submissions editor who works closely with writers. So I don't review the submissions that come in. But we have a certain philosophy around the way that we make space for new writers. We publish, I would say, maybe 160 pieces every year of poetry, fiction, essays that are sent to us. We probably receive maybe, that's like 10% of what we receive in submissions. So in submissions every month, we receive close to 350 submissions. And we are able to only publish a little bit of those. But brittle paper is a space for new voices. And sometimes I think that people say new voices, but, on the real, everybody wants to publish famous people. Brittle paper is for, when I say emergent voices, when I say people who the very first time they've ever been published is brittle paper, right? And so that's why sometimes when people make publishing this thing that is very exclusionary, right? Sometimes when we say want to publish the best, at Brittle Paper, we are proud of our writers. They are great. But I want to be part of your journey. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And that is a deeply human, just beautiful story to me when I meet people and they say, you are the first person who ever published me. And that is a very specific demographic. I think it's a specific demographic that is invisible in all literary cultures, right? Because everyone wants to publish you when you've sort of arrived, right? These are people I call aspiring writers, right? They are invisible. Nobody sees you. Like you have this 17-year-old kid, 18-year-old kid who wants to be a writer. This desire to be a writer. It is a very powerful thing, right? But then how do you go from imposter syndrome? How do you go from the lack of access to training? How do you go from, how do you get into those networks? For many of the authors who are here, they're already part of a certain networks, right? Where somebody would tell them, oh, there's this residency, there's this publisher, there's this person. The vast majority of the demographics that we serve are outside of that network. Like no opportunity, nothing, no mentorship. Nobody in your family has ever been a writer before. But you are like, one day I want to write. And you know what? Your poetry is not perfect. Your story is not perfect. But you need somebody to just give you a space where you can become. Do you understand what I mean? Yes. And I feel like that is what we do. That for me is the magic in what we do. Is that we respect aspiring writers. We think it is a real community of people and that they need a space to be seen and they need a voice. So Brittle Paper is not as if I am aspiring to become the New Yorker one day. We are not interested. And, there are lots of the beautiful, wonderful authors that are here, right? It's a journey. But for me, I am in this for the very, very long game, right? I'm thinking 20 years' time, 30 years' time, this boom that we are seeing in African literature, how can we keep the momentum? Because booms can also burst, right? One of the ways to keep the momentum and make sure that we have talent to feed the industry that we want, that we envision, is how would I say in corporate world, capacity building, right? It is fostering this talent. Lots of you here, you publish your books, your authors, but it is building the next of you who is going to come on in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time. That, to me, that's the specific demographic that we nurture and that we deeply care about. My editor is amazing. She's like, they look up to her. She takes their work very seriously. They have grown in our community, and we are extremely proud of being able to support that demographic of writers. And 98% of them are based in Africa. They are on the continent. So this is real investment in writing on the continent, from the continent, and they are not just Nigerians. Because, Nigeria is beautifully dominating. Well, no, let me not. Beautifully and dominating, they are not two words that should necessarily go together. But Nigerians are really visible in the literary space. So it's nice for us to be able to support younger writers, aspiring writers from all over the continent.
Thank you so much, Shanae. The next question I want to ask, which Wale already answered in his first question, is a lot of magazines currently operate in the online digital space. Do you think there's a need for print media? Is print media a lost media? Should we be looking at towards Web3 or wherever technology is going? Or do you think there's still a need for print media even in your editorials? So I'll come back to you, Ainei, but I'll ask Taufik to answer the question now.
Okay. I think print media is very important. While digital space have really helped young, new voices, have their works out there, as in Nigeria, your work, is published in journals outside, by journal outside Nigeria, without even traveling outside the country, and you can send your works to, to the US, to the UK, to even Uganda, and all those things. So it is very, very, an amazing thing. But it has helped us have our footprint. We call digital footprint. It helps us, we can, some of us can proudly, I was telling someone that I want to read your work, and he asked me, I want to read your work, and I responded, you can Google me. that kind of things. It has really helped a number of us have that, digital footprint all over, that anywhere in the world people access our works. But sometimes I was just going through, some of my works online, and I realized that works that I've written about 5-6 years ago, because these journals stopped working and they went on hiatus, this work disappeared. And it shows the importance of print media, that we still need these things. Imagine the works of our pioneers were online those times, and now we want to access them, and we realize that they've disappeared with the internet. So a number of us were able to read their works through a number of anthologies. We were able to access, Abiku by Wole Soyinka, Abiku by J.P. Clark, and various themes and topics, because they are in print. So it is still important to have this, print media, have our works, journals, anthologies, and particularly individual collection of works, so that, more than just documenting new voices, we need to preserve these voices. And print media, I believe, will help us preserve the voices. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Give a round of applause, please. Yeah, so I know brittle paper again, multiple categories. But same question to you. Do you think there is a need for print media in addition to existing in an online space? I know there's a magazine called Poets and Writers, I believe. They have they publish news and interviews on writers, poets, and events in the literary space. So I believe they have a print magazine in addition to the online magazine. So is something like that what you would consider for brittle paper, or do you exist solely in an online space?
I mean, I'm curious. I would like to hear more about your choice to go to print, and like just the kind of, because you're doing print in a very specific way that I think makes it. We are not just buying print; we are buying an artwork, right? And I'm curious to know, to kind of hear more about like how you thought about that. But I would say that brittle paper is 100% a digital project. In fact, the name brittle paper, sometimes people ask me, where did that come from? Is very much speaking to something that is very deep and unique to digital culture, which is that digital culture is not as married to a certain kind of culture of longevity in the way that print culture is, right? Shakespeare is special because he's been around for, his books have been relevant, continue to be relevant for about 400 years, right? But digital culture is like, a 15-minute TikTok video will touch you, make you chuckle, make you smile, make you angry, and then you sweat and move on to the next one. That things can be tiny and ephemeral, but still be powerful, right? That's the kind of paradox. I wanted to be able to kind of talk about culture in a way that did not take things too seriously, was just mainly focused on curating and making the culture visible. And the things that we make are small, but they are powerful, right? So brittle paper is a deeply, fundamentally digital project. But the only difference, what I'll say is that we might never go to print, or if we went to print, I think we are probably going to kind of be inspired by what the Republic is doing, right? In the sense that print, just as a way of disseminating information, is just not, it doesn't work the same way that digital culture does. Print just does not move as much information as fast as digital culture does. So print does something unique, right, that you can use in a very intentional way. But I would say that one of the concerns I have, and is a concern that Taufik raised, is the loss of work, right? We woke up one morning and MTV.com had shut down. So all those work, lots of work focused on like hip hop culture, all of that gone, right? So the question of how we build digital spaces, what kind of archival responsibilities we have to the culture is very important. And another aspect of that is the way that we are all moving to social media. Websites are becoming obsolete. Have you noticed? Right? The website as a space, everyone now goes to social media. And there is that push to do the same thing. And social media is powerful, and we are there, and we love it. It's magic. But I think we cannot leave all our baskets in that. My husband makes fun of me because I can never get that saying right.
Eggs in one basket. All our eggs in one basket, yeah.
Everything, the basket and the eggs. We cannot, so this push to go to social media is great, but I think we have to be cautious. Because if all of African literature is stored in Instagram, that's a kind of, why are you laughing? God, yeah, right? That is actually a nightmare, right? So we have to create alternate adjacent spaces that we have control over, right? And that's why for me, Brittle Paper as a website is a powerful archival engine, right? And that is never going to go anywhere. And we all own it, and it's always going to be there. TikTok will come and go. Twitter now is going, Abby, right? They will come and go, but we have to make sure that we are building these durable spaces that we have control over, that we have intellectual property rights over, so that in 30 years' time, our children are not like wondering, where were we? Where are we, right? They have access to massive, huge data, right? Because remember, data is king. So if we are not, data and culture is very important. Like, I can't say this enough. If you don't have information and knowledge about your culture, you are done, right? So for me, in African literature, building those kinds of massive data ports, data and banks, that's our goal. Again, the long game. That's what we are fighting for. But yeah.
Thank you, Anai. Round of applause, please. So I would like to go into the conversation, deeper into the conversation now of documenting the voices. In the introductory text to this panel discussion, we've learned that over 60% of Nigerian population are under 18, which means there's a growing need for arts that caters to these young children and adolescents. And also, we've noticed an influx of young emerging writers into the literary space. But in the same vein with this influx of young emerging writers, there's been exits of young emerging writers from the literary sector into other sectors due to challenges, barriers, or whatever. So how do you think we can build a sustainable creative economy in Nigeria? How do we remove these barriers and challenges that young emerging writers face in this space? So I'll start you, Wale.
Sure, and I know if there's time, definitely he will, maybe let me take the question about how we think about print. But in thinking about documenting new voices and creating a sustainable creative ecosystem, I think the first thing I always like to establish is when people speak about having a career in writing or a career in, as a writer, you are not alone, and there's historical context to this. Many of the writers that we know and love, took a very long time before they could even make sustainable careers out of writing. And that is no problem of the writers themselves, it's an industry problem, right? So, Chinua Achebe was, a broadcaster, became a professor. Ken Sariwa, who I've been doing a lot of work on, was many things. He worked in the government, he had a production company, etc. What you've always found in the industry is that there's always been this responsibility on the writers to kind of figure out their way. It's changing a bit, but we're still seeing more of the same thing where, you know, for me, for example, I don't have any, you know, it's not surprising if you have someone who works in tech but also writes. In fact, you know, I think in many ways having that kind of financial independence can definitely like free you up. But I think that these days, it's very important for us to start thinking about the industry in very, very creative ways. So for us, for example, what that looks like is our publishing, we like to describe it as decentralized. We currently work with a network of over 1,000, you know, storytellers, quote unquote, based across, you know, Nigeria, Africa, the African diaspora. And initially that just used to be writers, but now we're seeing that even illustrators, photographers have the same issues. And you will see that we've started to pay a lot of attention into design, into the visual aspect. That also even cuts across audio, which goes into some of the plans that we have for next year. But what we are trying to do is figure out a way that we can set industry benchmarks for what, you know, for kind of like, let's even say something as basic as payment rates could look like. One of the challenges that I had when I was starting the Republic was figuring out how much to actually pay. Because for me, it was very, very important from the beginning, very, very early on, that even if we were only able to pay 10K for an article, let's pay it. And let's put it on record that it's there. If you go on our website and you see this, you know, our submissions page, there are rates there. And from time to time, we really do send out surveys. We speak to people and try and figure out, does this rate still make sense, right? How much does it mean, or how much should we be looking at as a Nigerian company that's based here, that's facing Nigerian challenges? Because that also needs to be said. What is, you know, the right rate to pay people? And then of course but what we find is that we're often just throwing darts in the dark, and then we put a figure out there, we see the number of people that it attracts. But of course, the responsibility is still on us, that when you do get that funding, when you do get that extra amount, you can now invest more into that space, right? There's that big thing that Toni Morrison says about how, you know, when you get that fancy job, when you get that big position, your job is to literally open the door for other people. So for us, what that looks like is we are going to, again, to use Toni Morrison's quote, play in the dark a bit. None of this is on record. There's very few websites in Nigeria that you can go to that will tell you, here's how much we pay XYZ. And this is not even just a writing problem. But what that means is that if you are trying to figure out how to kind of build, you know, a system where people who write for you regularly can actually earn an income that is really, really impressive, you have to kind of take risks, but also involve them in that conversation. And I think that that's what we've been trying to do.
Thank you so much, Wale. I've gotten the cue to start the Q&A, but I'd like to give Ainlei and Taufik a chance to answer the question. So the question is, how do we build a sustainable economy, creative economy in Nigeria? And please answer briefly, because we need to start the Q&A.
I just need to quickly congratulate the Republic for their $500 million. 500.
Million is faithful.
Million is good. $500,000 grants from the Mellon Foundation. And OSF as well. That's wonderful. 500 million one day it will happen. I honestly don't. Bridge to Paper is based in the US, and it's a completely different model of funding. And we are self-sufficient, but we are I don't think of Brittle Paper as a business. I just don't. It's a space that is funded. It generates its own income, and it's also funded partly by my university. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and they love the project, and so they support it a lot. So for me, it's really just a space. So what that does is that it does free us to be able to make space for as many people as we can, right? So if you want us to review your book, you send it to us. If we have the manpower, we will. If you have an event, like we do for everybody, right? Because we are not asking for payments. We are not asking for, like it's not a space where we are trying to make money. It's a space where we have support and we're just trying to open it up to as many people as possible. So really, it's just for the culture.
Thank you so much. Tafik, do you want to?
Okay, I'll quickly say that creative writing is a great work that should at least be rewarded. We need to, for encouragement, for continuity, and we have a very tiny journals in Nigeria that pay. I'm aware that Consayo is paying. I've been paid when I submit my work to them. So, but they are very, very, very little. But while it's important to look for rewarding writers, we need to make it decentralized so that we're not expecting someone to pay, and one day when you publish a work that doesn't look good for them, they withdraw their support. You get it has to be very independent. So I think writers should just carry their work on their head. Whenever they publish, market it, distribute it the way you can, and on. One of the steps that I've taken this year, we started Felix Catus Press, and we'll be publishing 2 poets in 2025. Something will go to the authors, royalties, and all that. So I believe a number of journals should come together, collaborate, and join resources to do more of that, so that we can see writing as a way of becoming rich. Yeah.
Okay. I still have questions for Wale about funding, but we don't have time for that. Maybe I will see you after. We can discuss funding, because 500K, who wants to have a conversation with Wale with me? Anyway, we need to start the Q&A. I see some hands in the audience. Can she get a mic? A lady in wine.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Fafa. So the work you guys do is truly impressive and humbling. But I also my question is, for you to be able to build the credibility for you to be able to build the credibility that you have as, for example, Brittle Paper or the Republic, there are platforms where, like, if you go on, you know that, okay, fine, this is where everything is at. So how did you start from an idea to be able to build that credibility that people actually, a credibility that commands respect, that actually is something that people know that, okay, this is what it is, and then also for funding. Like Ane said, it's the work she does is being sponsored by the university, and so she's opening spaces up for other people. But I think for Wale's case, it's more like, okay, fine, I need to do this. So how do you get the funding to be able to push something through like that?
Okay, I think we don't need to have the conversation after that, because she's asked about funding, so I'd like to chip in. In addition to our question, I also want to know about when, because a lot of work we do in the African Nigerian literature space is funded by these bodies. So how much control do they have over the editorial process as regards the funding? So yeah, I would like Wale to answer. I think the question was directed to Wale. So please answer the question.
Sure. I mean, I can take it, and I'll just try and be quick because I know that, we're on time. I think, look, funding is a never-ending journey. I've been funding from day one, literally from day zero. But the thing to note is, I never did it alone, right? I'm the leader of the Republic, but I'm not. The Republic has never been only me. There have been many fantastic people, and there are many fantastic people who work with us in many different capacities. Oftentimes, people send us funding opportunities. Maybe they've published with us. They really understand the rigor of the process. But I think, number one, platforms like Arcade Festival have been really good ways of me kind of just pushing out that message. This is not my first time here. It's platforms like these and kind of also doing the work in that sense that make it become a very repetitive thing. So people know you, they get to associate that level or that drive that for the work that you're doing. But it comes down to your editorial process. I think for us, that has always been the key thing. Be very rigorous about your editorial process if you want people to take you seriously. And it also means if you can be rigorous enough, you can tackle the big topics. But I think for us, where we really hit the nail on the head was platforming experts. And the way that we define an expert is, number one, obviously in the textbook sense, we're not going to get a creative writer to write about what's happening in the Sahel. Do you see what I mean? Even though we get many submissions like that, we will reroute them to a topic that we feel that they are more suitable for. So it's very, very, very big on expertise and kind of just taking what we do seriously. But on funding, because I think that that's, the bigger question here, I think the first thing to realize is for us to be taken seriously, we had to have been doing this for 3 consistent years with very clean books. I've had very, very proper accounting. We now have an in-house accountant. You have to be fundable for you to get funding. And part of that fundability is, are you doing audits? We've been doing audits for as long as I can remember. We pay very, very close attention to the books. We don't just commission writers. We will send them an invoice. They have to fill the invoice. We document it. Everything is documented. Again, for you to receive funding, you have to be fundable. But what that funding does not do is mean they have control over your editor. No way. I think, again, from what I've been saying, independence is very, very key to the work that we do. And the way that we work around independence is, number one, having a very solid legal team. There is no agreement that comes to us that isn't vetted by a very, very solid legal team. And then the second is we also diversify, like our funding is diversified. It's a mix of grants, but it's also, surprisingly, a healthy amount of subscriptions as well. For a long time, readers, and that's why I said that we've not been doing this alone. For a long time, readers who care about the work that we do and are able to afford to pay have been paying to read it. And there are other avenues as well, from partnerships to some of the merchandise that you're seeing there as well. These have been carefully thought through so that we have multiple streams of fundraising. And of course, the 2 funders that she's mentioned are not our only funders. We've only announced those because of the projects that are attached to them. So we try as well to just make sure that there is no way that we are dependent on any single organization, which I think is a mistake that organizations make sometimes. So the fact that you can keep your funding diverse, but you can also keep the way that you generate income diverse, leaves you room to be a bit more independent when you are discussing with funders or when you're trying to think about your own funding. And I think that's the approach that we've taken to it. So there's no editorial influence on the work that we do.
All right, thank you so much. Guy in wearing cap. I'll come back to you.
Thank you. There is this grievance that I have nurtured for some time, and thankfully I'm at the right place and at the right time to table it.
You can speak here.
Yes. It's about, basically, when it is fiction, I always go for African fiction, unless the book is a Booker or Pulitzer finalist, or maybe classified as a classic. And I basically discover books from media outlets. Maybe we are now getting towards end of the year. We may see something like Times Best Book of 2024, this and that, But in Africa, by the time you start looking for Best African Book of the Year, you Google search, use ChatGPT and all that. There is no visibility for African books. And Brittle Paper here is, I think I even see your platform more as a news platform than a magazine. Yes. So we are getting to end of the year, and I believe maybe as I table this grievance here, your news outlet may try to document those books. I don't have issue with titles from Nigeria. Social media is sufficient to provide that for me. But maybe what is happening in Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, and all that. So that's one question. And then the other question that I still want to ask publishers is, there is this general belief among young creatives that rejection or acceptance is subjective. Yes, because even I know I submitted a fiction to be published in AK Review. when I received the rejection letter, I show it to my friend, and then he said, don't worry, this thing is just subjective. So how true is it that rejection or acceptance is a subjective something? Thank you.
In the first question, you said you don't see lists of African books published, but I know the brief paper does best African literature. Yeah, they do. I have a grievance of my own. My grievance is you would check through Beetle paper list of best books. You will not see poetry there. You will see fiction. You will see non-fiction. If you like win Booker Prize for poetry, you know go see them for there. So yeah, that's my grievance.
I like that all the grievances are being aired here. Okay, I love it. I mean, this is what this space is for, and that's why it's so magical. So yes, we do have a 100 notable African books of the year. It's been running since 2018. If you go to Bristol Paper, it's there. It's a fiercely Pan-African list. And I don't know who I was talking to today in the morning. Was I was talking to you that we've already done our list. We have it done already. It's coming out first week of December. But we curate all the other countries first before Nigeria. Nigeria is headache. You know why? Because usually we will start with like a list of 350 books that we've been recording for the past 3 years, because we learn about books before they come out, like 2 years before, sometimes. And so we sit down with like 350 books and we begin to do our thing. Nigeria would account for like half of that list. So it's like, and I mean, I don't want to create a list, 100 notable books of African books of the year, and 64 of them is Nigerian. Like, that's not okay, you know? So we have to whittle down that list. But usually, our list will feature like 26 African countries. In fact, last year, Western Sahara, we featured a book from there. Djibouti, we featured a book from Djibouti, right? And these are books translated into English. So imagine how difficult that is. Equatorial Guinea, Hispanophone Africa, the only African country that speaks Spanish. We've included books from there. So it's a list that is designed to show you the continent. So yeah, follow it. It's coming out 1st of June, and you get a sense. The poetry part, I agree, and I take that criticism. I think that fiction has just been, African literature is a literature, I mean, we are addicted to fiction. And I think it's changing now because poetry is exploding like crazy. And it's been a joy to see. And I laud all the publishers who are investing in these poets. That was literally, when we were as a team putting the list together, that was literally a big thing on the board, poetry. So this year you will see.
All right, thank you. We don't have time for any more questions. We have time for one quick question, and there's this lady in front. Please give her the mic.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. A quick question about language. It seems to me to be the big elephant in the room is how do we deal with our multiple African languages in which so many of these platforms are English, French, or Spanish. How do we account for that? You started touching on it with translation, but I just want to hear your thoughts on it.
I would say that the challenge with language is expertise, right? Bristol Paper is an international site. I have no problem publishing essays in Shona. And we have published essays in Shona before. Because I don't have like Bristol Paper is not an Anglophone site because it's some kind of like branding thing. I would gladly create a space. But the expertise, I don't have access to expertise. And expertise, these things come at a cost. I don't have that type of funding, right? But I think it is a carryover on the way we have failed royally in investing in African language literature. So when Ngugi started to talk in the 70s, if we had started then, we'll be in a different place today, right? And I feel like sometimes I'm sad. I feel like we are making the same mistake. So 30 years' time, somebody in a festival like this will be asking the same question. Yes. Do you get my point? And I'm just like, how can we invest in African language literature in a way that feels organic, that is market-driven, and that makes sense? How can we do that? I feel like it's the million-dollar question for me. But I feel like digital culture also have given us tools that we can use. So like, how can we do it? All I can say is that it's an urgent need, and we need to invest in African language literature.
Round of applause, round of applause.
Why are you asking about your grievances? We will talk about them later. Leave them. They've been talking since. Please, this our new host, marks out of 10. What do you give him? 10. See? 20 out of 10. Please help me knock this boy a round of applause. Super, super proud of you. And please join me in thanking Taufik Ayeyemi, Ainehi Edoro.